This is the Pharmaverse podcast. I'm your host, Michael Petrak, engaging leaders from the pharma universe. Hello and welcome to the Pharmaverse podcast. I'm your host, Michael Petrak. And if you're a leader or an aspiring leader in the pharmaceutical industry, you're in the right place. And I'm very excited about today's guest, Leslie Meltzer, who is the Chief Medical Officer at Orchard Therapeutics. Leslie is one of just a handful of PhD CMOs in the pharma industry. So we're going to learn how she achieved this rare feat. So Leslie Meltzer, welcome to the Pharmaverse.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm excited to share the story of how I got to where I am. And before I do that, that was a very nice intro. I do want to stress that my journey, my career journey, wouldn't have been possible without all of the different people that I've worked with along the way, the managers who supported me, the executives who championed me throughout the organization, my peers, my cross-functional partners, and then later on all of my direct reports who work with me. I'm not going to name everybody because I probably would miss someone, but everything we're going to talk about today was something that happened that was the success of a team. And it's always very important for me at the outset to acknowledge that my successes are all team successes.
Yeah, I really appreciate that sentiment. I mean, nobody gets anywhere by themselves. Someone has to give you a chance, and somebody else, laid the groundwork that you later, the runway that you later launch off of. And so beautiful sentiments. Thank you for that. And
Sure.
as I mentioned during the intro, you're sort of a rare bird. I mean, a CMO that holds a PhD. And on top of that, you've really skyrocketed in your career right from the beginning. So let's start there. In your first role, you broke in and you were promoted really in the first couple of years. How did that promotion come about?
Yeah, so my first company that was coming right out of graduate school, and I had decided about three-quarters of the way through grad school that I knew I wanted to make a change into industry. I explored a lot of different career options and stumbled upon a bit medical affairs as a category of options, mostly because of my interest in educating around science, my ability to pick up concepts quickly and explain them effectively to other people. And I was also really interested in that process of actually developing and then bringing a drug to the market, and actually how a company can commercialize a scientific concept into a real medicine. It was something that really interested me, and medical affairs kind of sits at that nexus between clinical development and the business of commercializing therapies. So I applied for a lot of positions. I finally had the opportunity for my first position as a med info manager in a company that was focused in pulmonary hypertension, which was very much outside my training. Like you said, I trained as a neuroscientist. And I think, I was very lucky in that first role to have a manager who was very encouraging of people who were new to industry, who were making that transition from academia, and was willing to be very helpful in making connections, providing advice, and also giving me opportunities to do things kind of above and beyond what a traditional intro med info manager would be doing in a big company. And so I picked up the role itself really quickly, the role of understanding all the products and being able to develop response documents and things like that. I was also involved in promotional material review, so I got to know marketing pretty well. I got to know regulatory pretty well. And one thing that was really important to me when I was getting up to speed and being new was building those connections and talking to people about what it was they did, how they work with medical, and what are some things that I could do in my role to bring value to them and be a good partner to them. And this came into focus really nicely when the company brought in a new product, actually relatively quickly after I joined. And so I'm learning everything. I'm learning the whole portfolio. And I figure, maybe if I get really good at this new product that nobody knows anything about yet, I can be useful to people who are developing the commercialization plan for this product. And that actually worked out. I got pulled into meetings. I got pulled into projects that were above and beyond, I would say, my role in medical information. And that was in large part by me focusing on how I could bring value to the people I was working with. And that was very well recognized, and being pulled into those different activities gave me an opportunity to kind of show what I could do and how I could think. And that's what led ultimately to being able to make that transition from a medical information manager into kind of the medical director's office, which is where I had that further opportunity to advance within the company.
Yeah, so really the nugget there is make yourself a person of value, and your internal stock value, as a person really
Right,
skyrockets.
right.
And as you were doing that, as you were, becoming that therapeutic expert and being pulled into other meetings, I'm sure you were stepping into other people's functions a little bit. Did people get territorial about that at all?
Yeah, they totally did.
Okay.
I learned pretty quickly that I needed to make sure that when I was being enthusiastic about learning and trying new things and contributing to new things that a med info manager wasn't typically contributing to, that I be very clear about my intentions and be very, genuine about my intentions. I think people who know me well know that I'm pretty direct and pretty straightforward and say what I do and do what I say. Um, but not everybody that people work with is like that. And so I think sometimes if somebody comes on very strong and engaged, it can give the impression of wanting to take things over, which really was not ever my intent. And here's another example of why I think the people that you choose to be around is really important because my manager, again, at the time, was so good at going to bat for me, at being a champion of me and an advocate of me, and helping me navigate those situations, coaching me on behaviors that would make it so I could build good relationships with the cast of characters around me. And in at least one case, I was doing something that was intended to be kind of a bridge between functions, and it was never really perceived the way I had hoped it would be. And I ultimately, did back off. But that was really an exception. I think people were finding that the way I was working when I was collaborating with them was helping them. It was helping them be effective in their own job and helping them be visible to their colleagues as a success. And I wasn't looking for, credit for these successes. I really was genuinely interested in the success of the organization and the success of the product that we were launching at the time. So I think as others around me were benefiting from our collaboration, they were willing to continue to pull me in. And so those instances that I talked about in the beginning tended to happen when people didn't know me very well. But by being genuine and authentic and getting to know people, you can minimize the likelihood of that happening on a regular basis, although it never really goes away.
Well, it seems like you really do a good job of getting to know people around you. You're hungry to learn. Again, the person of value, all that is really good takeaways.
Yeah.
And you mentioned something earlier. Your PhD is in neuroscience from Stanford, by the way. But then your first industry role is in cardiopulmonary.
Yeah.
And that's sort of a theme throughout your whole career, working in different therapeutic areas, which is just like everything is very atypical.
Yeah.
What would you say is a best practice for people who are leading, but in a therapeutic area where they're not really the expert?
So you've got to come in remembering that you're not the expert and really be focused in the beginning on learning, right? So if you think you're a PhD scientist, you can learn any scientific discipline really quickly. But the reality is there's years of wisdom about a particular therapeutic area that you're never going to be able to get just from reading papers and viewing presentations at conferences, which are things you should do, right? At the start, even before joining a company, I would always immerse myself in the literature and really try to understand the ins and outs of the disease and the products I was going to be working on. But I would say that when I join a company, I spend a lot of time building relationships with individuals, first internally with key cross-functional partners and leaders, and really understanding again what it is they do, what do they see as the role of medical or whatever role I happen to be in, and what are some opportunities to maybe strengthen the relationship that they have with that organization and how I can facilitate that. And then as I get up to speed and learn from them, I can also use their insights about the business, the therapeutic area, to inform discussions I have with the next person I talk to. And over a period of a few months, you get to the point where you know enough to sound credible, and you can start to go out there and talk to the physicians and the scientists and the key opinion leaders in the space. And again, they're not expecting you to be more knowledgeable of medicine than them. They're expecting you to be a good partner to them as a representative of the organization. And that can mean asking a lot of questions of them. People love to give advice. So anytime you ask people for advice, they're very happy to give it. And I found that using that forum as a mechanism to kind of continuously onboard, and I would say that goes on even after you're pretty well established in an organization. There's always new information to gather. And I would say I try to keep a pretty open mind and be pretty humble about this, and build continuous learning into my workday with literature reading, actually attending sessions at conferences, going to webinars, and then also meeting new people in the space within the organization, outside the organization. It's just kind of constantly looking to be more knowledgeable. And if you're authentically learning information, you definitely give a credible presentation that you understand the therapeutic area and the business in a way that you can make good strategic decisions about the things you're doing.
Yeah, you mentioned the word humble. And as you were describing that, that's what the word that was popping in my mind. It takes a great deal of humility
Yeah.
to recognize that you're not the expert, and what might be, I mean, human nature is to like try to fake it until you make it kind of a thing. But
No.
yeah, that doesn't work all the time, and that's for sure. But
It might work for some people. I just think that I very much, again, like what you see is what you get. And if I tried to do that, I feel like there's no way it would be taken seriously. I've had instances where I've been relatively new in an organization, going back just now to the first company we were talking about. Within a couple months, I was asked to give a deep dive on the data for that new product, for another department. And I remember seeing a colleague from commercial walk by, and she had this look of kind of surprise on her face that she saw me presenting to this group of people. And afterward, we were chatting, and she was very impressed that I had already gotten up to speed to the point where I could give a presentation to colleagues. But that was a very kind of concerted effort of really bending over backwards to learn this information, and keep in mind that I had a lot to learn.
the as you were describing it, the image that came to my mind when you were talking about you build off what other people tell you.
Yeah.
I had this image of like, brick upon brick kind of a
Hmm.
thing. And it seems like, at least in my experience, I don't know about yours, but like if you reach out to someone and they're the expert and you're really hungry to learn, they'll give you a brick,
They will. They will.
and it's up to you to build on those each time.
Absolutely.
Well,
Absolutely.
in your career, your next stop was then in the neuroscience space, and giving your training that's, right in your area of strength. But then, you go in as an associate director. 3 years later, you've already been promoted to director and then senior director. But senior director of the hemophilia business unit. How did that all come about? Same story or something different?
In some ways, there's a lot in common with what happened at my first company, but there are a few little differences throughout. Maybe I'll just kind of walk through that whole journey. So, this is a company that I joined, which was a big leader in the multiple sclerosis space. So, I knew neuroscience, but I didn't know anything about multiple sclerosis coming in. So, a lot of the beginning was, again, getting up to speed on that therapeutic area and that business. Multiple sclerosis is a very extensive business in the United States. So there's a lot of history there. There's a lot of different products. There's a lot of personalities. And so really learning not just, again, the science and the specific product that I was working on, but making connections with all those different people in the company who had years, sometimes decades, right, in the space, as well as the physicians that they'd been collaborating with for years. To really understand this product that I was going to be working on, which would be a new product in this existing portfolio. So again, got very quickly up to speed on the key data. I could basically recite what would be in a future PI within a couple of weeks, and that's a useful party trick. because then people see that you are taking information and that you can provide information that they may not be able to provide. And so you're useful, again, in situations where information needs to be shared. So I pretty quickly was not just working with my colleagues internally, but was also out there with the field team and with other cross-functional partners, building connections with key opinion leaders and physicians as the data for this program was being communicated at scientific conferences, and understanding their perceptions of the product and what they thought were likely going to be potential challenges or questions that they might have if it were to become commercially available. So then I'm taking that information back from these KOL interactions and leveraging some of the connections I'd built internally with cross-functional partners to start to put together resources that we would be able to use as a medical team that took a different look at the data we'd collected in trials or presented it in a different way or focused on like the management of a particular adverse event to make it really useful and accessible to the team so that when these questions come up in the field, they don't have to just say, yeah, it's something we're working on. They can say, actually, well, we went back and we looked at the data from the trial, and here's what it showed, and here's some ideas. We don't have the answer, but this is something we can work on together, right? And I think that was really well received by my colleagues in the different departments and in the field team as being able to, anticipate what was going to be on the minds of healthcare providers and have at the ready information that would meet their needs. Um, so that was, I think, a key part of how I was able to establish myself as a credible expert within the company and within the community in a pretty short period of time by really understanding that business and that potential, the challenges that that product might have when it moved into the commercial setting and being able to anticipate that. Um, and that really elevated me again in the eyes of some senior people in the organization. I remember being on a panel at a launch meeting with the CMO of the company and the head of development for that particular product. And anytime there were a very data oriented, detailed question, those two would punt it to me. And I'm just this junior medical director sitting there with the most senior people in the organization. And I remember one of them saying, this person knows more about this drug than anybody else in the company. And it was just incredibly flattering to think that, because first of all, I don't think it was true. But second, to have that level of recognition from somebody so important in the company, but also just an expert in the field was incredible. And that opened a lot of doors for me, I think, internally to have that level of visibility with senior leadership. So I moved from that individual product role into a role focusing on our entire portfolio in MS and thinking about how these products work together and thinking about how different aspects of how we operated could be enhanced with things that would help not one individual product be successful, but the entire portfolio. Things like competitive intelligence, things like how we interact with healthcare providers beyond just the prescriber, things like how we support the needs of diverse patient populations that might have been underrepresented in our trials and how we get more data on those and on how therapies work in those populations and so forth. And again, that was pretty well received, and it required me now to get up to speed on the entire portfolio at the level that I was on that first product. And it was during that time that I was asked to make a move from MS to hemophilia. And candidly, my first response was no, thank you. I really liked working in MS. Like you said, my background's neuro. I was really enjoying the business and the successes that me and the team had on those programs. And then my manager, who was outstanding, by the way, another favorite manager of mine who's helped me, throughout the years and always been a great mentor to me. He sent me to his boss, who told me, yeah, he wasn't asking you. You need to move to hemophilia. And the reason for that was they saw some of the kind of the general principles of how I was thinking about our business, about the MS business and how medical affairs was working with other functions, and thought this could be a useful way of thinking in this other business unit that isn't our area of expertise as a company, but is an area we care about a lot with new products coming online. So I took those kind of general ways of operating in MS and brought them to that organization. And I don't think I would have been able to do that if they hadn't been aware of my ability to learn new products quickly, if they hadn't been aware of my experience outside of MS coming into the organization. So having that reputation of being able to jump around between different therapeutic areas makes it so you can actually just, it's kind of self-propagating. The more you do that, the easier it becomes because you can take the general principles of how to operate in any business and apply them to a new therapeutic area.
That's what I was going to say. What I'm pulling out of this is one, again, be that person of value.
Hmm.
Go above and beyond what's actually in your remit. I saw you doing things that were not necessarily assigned to you, but you knew would add value to the overall team.
Hmm.
And then you built trust, that
Yeah.
hard work and that demonstration of ability and that you were all in,
Hmm.
built trust, even those high level leaders saying, "Hey, she's the one that knows the most about this." I mean, that they don't just give that away. That's something
No,
that you earn. So those are great nuggets. Thank you for sharing those.
sure.
And there's something else that I don't know if selfishly I want to know this, but I think our leaders will want to, or the aspiring leaders more than anything will want to know this. So after that stint, then you get your shot as a VP in a different therapeutic area again. Any tips, any nuggets about how in an interview setting,
Yeah.
how you can sell yourself to land a job in a different therapeutic area?
Yeah. No, it's a wonderful question, and I want to give it some good thought because in some ways I am kind of amazed that I ended up getting that position. So I switched not just from MS and hemophilia, but from rare disease, which is basically where I'd operated, or orphan disease, which is where I'd operated my entire career until that point, to chronic kidney disease, which is something that it affects, 1 in 6 Americans. Very, very pervasive, and this is a very different way of operating a pharmaceutical company when you're going after this very large potential population of patients. There were two things that I think I was able to call on in those interviews that I think really mattered in being able to get the position that I did. The first was, again, that history of moving around. If you can show empirically that you've moved around between different therapeutic areas and have been able to succeed in doing that, again, there's more kind of credibility to the narrative that you can do it again. And I had a CV that had me promoted multiple times at my first company and had me promoted multiple times at my second company. And this is different therapeutic areas each time. So they're seeing that I can make those moves and they're probably hearing it from me as I'm talking to them. And the other piece at this particular company, the person I was reporting to, it was a nephrology KOL in his own right, and a really smart one at that. And I think that he wasn't looking for the person running med affairs under him to be a nephrologist. He was looking for somebody who could run medical affairs. He's the nephrologist, and he will provide that clinical guidance to the person working for him, and that's a great opportunity for someone like me who is new to the therapeutic area but really understands kind of medical affairs and how it operates. And I was so excited about this position when I had a chance to interview for it, and I think that probably came through a lot in the interview because I'd been in an organization that's not big pharma, but it was a pretty big company, and everybody has kind of a little piece of the structure of the company. And here was a chance to move into a smaller company, but have oversight and accountability for the entire medical affairs apparatus, albeit a small apparatus, but all the different functions, field medical, the medical directors, medical communications, publications, the support medical provides on the health economic side, and so forth. And throughout my time in my previous company, I'd really been thinking about how all of these different pieces can work together in concert to drive medical strategy within an organization. But I didn't expect I'd have an opportunity to do that for a long time in the bigger organization. So this felt like a great chance to put those ideas to work on a timeline that I felt like I was ready for. And when I was explaining my thought process, I feel like that was very well received, and that was what they were looking for in the person who was going to be running medical affairs in their organization. And I was really emphasizing to them, based on the limited reading that I'd done about chronic kidney disease, you know, here's what I've done in the past, but here's how I'm thinking I can apply this in your organization. Here's how I think this could be relevant here. These are the types of projects I would like to do. These are the types of working teams I'd like to put together. Here's how I'd like to work with you in the function that you're coming from, that you're interviewing me for. And if you're presenting yourself in terms of not just here's all the things that I've done in the past, but here's how I'm going to leverage that experience to help you, to help this company be successful. That generally goes a long way. So I think that combination of the track record of versatility and the very clear vision that I was bringing in on how I could see myself leading the organization and being kind of a good fit for what that organization needed at that particular time was really critical.
Yeah, I love those nuggets. And, you talk about showing, not telling. A lot of people
Yes,
go into that interview and they're trying to tell you what they would do, but you were able to show what you have done and how you did it.
yes.
And then the other thing that you hit on about being excited about the role, and that's a key thing. The other thing that I noticed, and I bet you undersold yourself, I bet you prepared like crazy,
Oh,
knowing
absolutely.
you.
Absolutely.
I read a little bit. I'm sure you read a lot. But this is all leading us now to Orchard Therapeutics. Back in your sweet spot in neuroscience, you came in as the VP of Medical Affairs, so you're in now your second VP role.
Mhm.
Were there any big learnings or leaps that you made as a leader from your first VP role to your second?
Definitely. So I'll say that as much as Orchard has quite a few programs in the neuroscience space, I don't think we would necessarily call ourselves a neuroscience company. This is a company developing gene therapies using a hematopoietic stem cell gene therapy platform that's used in a lot of different therapeutic areas. So again, kind of coming in and having that versatility of having worked in many backgrounds is very useful when you're coming into a technology company that's going to be working across a lot of different therapeutic areas. A big difference between this role and the previous one is that the previous one, I came into an organization that was already in existence. I made a few changes, but it was really operating and needed a leader to kind of shape the longer term direction. Here I was literally building the organization from the ground up. And I had, again, tremendous support from my manager who hired me, the CMO, who was willing to champion what I wanted to do to her colleagues so I could get the resources I needed to do what I wanted to do. Um, and it was a development stage company. I'm moving from commercial stage to development stage. I'm moving to a pre-IPO, very early stage company. But the ins and outs of medical affairs are not that different between different companies and different therapeutic areas. At the end of the day, it's about learning from healthcare providers about unmet needs and then generating and communicating data that's going to meet those needs, gathering feedback and kind of constantly in that virtuous cycle of learning and educating. So that was going to be the case at a new company as well, and I wanted to build that in to our processes. One of the things that I did that I think was very helpful coming in really quickly, there were a lot of people in the organization who had only ever worked in development stage companies and weren't maybe as familiar with medical affairs and what it did. So I thought, we got to quickly kind of show what we can do and how we bring value to the organization. And a lot of that was setting up things that are well established in a big company, but just weren't in existence yet, like a literature library, like a medical information system, like a publication strategy and a publications plan. We really ramped up publications at the time that I joined, and a lot of that is really helpful in an environment where you're still a very small company that's raising money from the investment community and you want to get data out there frequently. Um, so we implemented those things very early, and this was noticed and got a lot of positive feedback. Look what this team can do. What else can they do? Right?
Yeah.
So we were changing the business from the get-go and bringing value to the organization as a whole. So, focusing on how me as an individual and then the team I hired, can could bring value to Orchard as a whole through our role in medical affairs.
Yeah, I mean, that's so just what you did as an individual contributor, now you did it as a departmental level. How can we bring value?
Hmm.
How can we show value quickly and
Hmm.
be something that is, indispensable?
Yes, exactly.
All right, so now you're promoted again, and now you're the CMO. Hit me with one challenge that a CMO has that you never had at any other level.
Just one.
The top one.
Well, it's a big job, but I mean, moving from the roles I've been doing to this role, it really is that change from functional leadership to enterprise leadership. And we say that vaguely without necessarily saying what it means. But what it really means is, you have a department, but you're not just thinking about that department. You really have to be thinking all the time about the company as a whole and its overarching strategy for how it's going to be successful while representing the perspectives of your department that you lead. Um, and that's a challenge, I think, for a lot of people who move into more extensive leadership roles over time and oversee functions where they may not have direct experience working in that function like I do now. Um, but I think my behaviors and the things that I was prioritizing early on in my career without realizing kind of set me up to make that transition because I've always been, really interested in what other people are doing and what their role is, what value they're bringing to the organization, how we can work together. Originally for the purpose of so I can do my job better, but now I'm also doing that from this perspective of I need to be able to think about and contribute to decision making for the entire business. So I need to have those kinds of relationships with people outside of my own business unit, and I need to be able to um, bring value to all of them, to the entire company, as in my role as one of the members of the executive leadership team. So I think, if you're somebody who spends a lot of time in your day to day talking to people outside your group and thinking big picture about the organization, when you have an opportunity to be in a leadership role where that's a requirement, it comes much more naturally. So it's something you can cultivate from the very beginning of your career, right? Just making those connections with people outside of your own functional area and really understanding what's important to them.
Great insights. Man, and that applies to a lot of different businesses, even the recruiting world.
Yeah.
Outstanding. This episode is brought to you by K. Bassman International, the leader in pharma and biotech recruiting. When pharma executives need to make critical hires, they go to the experts at K. Bassman, pharma's one source staffing solution. Visit kbic.com. Now back to the episode. Just one last question here. I know you're a big believer in mentors and mentees. You've mentioned
Mhm.
that you've had mentors over the years, and I know you have several mentees. What are some of the gold nuggets that you share with your mentees? Like, for instance, somewhere out there listening is the Leslie Meltzer of 20 or 12 years ago. What advice would you share with her?
I probably tell her to relax. It's going to be okay. Like, I think that if you do your job well and you stick to the principles of how you work and you're true to yourself, generally you're going to have opportunities come your way. But if we're going to get very specific about it, I think it's helpful to know yourself really well and know what you're good at and know what you like and find opportunities to be in situations where you can leverage your strengths. And I said at the beginning, I can absorb information quickly. I can explain it well. In a public setting, I don't have a lot of nervousness around public speaking. So I've found positions that let me leverage those strengths. And I think it's always helpful as people are thinking about their career within a company, kind of that Venn diagram between what are the things that they're interested in or that they do well, and what are the things that will really help the success of the organization as a whole, and focus in on the overlap between those two things because that's win-win for your own career, for your own professional development, and then for the success of the company. And of course, like I've been saying all along, really get to know the people around you, get to know what they do, what their challenges are, how you can be a good partner to them so that you further enhance your ability to bring value to the organization, and at the same time continue to learn more that's going to help you as you advance in your career.
Wonderful nuggets. Sadly, this half hour has gone by so fast, and
Yeah, it
that's all the
did.
time that we have. But really, on behalf of all the listeners here and everyone in the Pharmaverse, thank you so much for your time and your insights. You've been a wonderful guest. Leslie Meltzer is a great follow on LinkedIn, so I'd recommend that. But Leslie, thank you so much for being a guest.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us on the Pharmaverse podcast. Make sure you subscribe below so you don't miss any leadership insights. Like and comment. I would love to hear from you. We'll see you on the next episode of Pharmaverse.